The world's largest country stands at a crossroads, grappling with challenges that could redefine its existence. As the Russia-Ukraine war drags on, straining Moscow's military and economic capacities, one must ask, could we be witnessing the beginning of the end for a unified Russia? With its sprawling territory covering 11 time zones and home to over 190 ethnic groups, Russia faces a host of internal and external pressures. From rising separatist movements to glaring regional economic disparities and the added strain of international sanctions, these factors raise a compelling question: is the fragmentation of Russia an inevitable outcome of its current trajectory? Let's analyze the internal and external pressures that Russia is facing, and if you think these are high prices for those who start a war, please comment one in the comment section. Historical state collapses offer crucial insights into potential scenarios for territorial fragmentation. Two significant examples from recent history demonstrate how seemingly stable nations can rapidly dissolve under specific conditions. The Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991 presents a compelling case study of state collapse. Before its downfall, the USSR appeared economically stable, ranking as the world's second-largest economy in 1990. However, internal stagnation and failed reforms ultimately led to its dissolution. The Soviet economy faced severe challenges, with foreign debt reaching $19.90 billion by 1981. Gorbachev's attempts at systematic reform, including perestroika and glasnost, inadvertently accelerated the collapse rather than preventing it. Yugoslavia's breakup pattern reveals how ethnic tensions can shatter a multinational state. The country experienced relative stability and economic success from 1960 to 1980, with annual GDP growth averaging 6.1%. However, this prosperity masked deepening ethnic divisions. Following the death of leader Josip Broz Tito in 1980, Yugoslavia faced mounting challenges, including rising ethnic nationalism, economic disparities between regions, weakening federal authority, and growing separatist movements. The dissolution process turned violent, with inter-ethnic Yugoslav wars causing significant humanitarian crises. The conflict's intensity highlighted how quickly peaceful coexistence can deteriorate into territorial fragmentation. Common factors in state disintegration emerge from both cases. A failed state typically loses its ability to project authority over territory and peoples, protect national boundaries, and maintain basic administrative functions. In both the Soviet and Yugoslav cases, economic dysfunction played a crucial role. The gap between developed and underdeveloped regions severely strained national unity. By 1987, Slovenia saw better economic prospects for independence than within Yugoslavia. These historical precedents hold particular relevance amid the current Russia-Ukraine war. Like its Soviet predecessor, modern Russia shows signs of economic strain under international sanctions. The country faces similar challenges that contributed to previous state collapses: ethnic diversity across vast territories, regional economic disparities, and mounting international isolation. The pattern of state disintegration often accelerates once it begins. In Yugoslavia's case, the breakdown of central authority led to rapid territorial fragmentation, with multiple regions declaring independence within months. Similarly, the Soviet Union's dissolution, once initiated, proceeded swiftly across its constituent republics. Internal pressures within Russia have intensified significantly since the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war, creating multiple stress points that challenge the nation's cohesion. Recent developments reveal growing fissures in the country's social, economic, and political fabric. Ethnic separatist movements have been gaining significant traction in various parts of Russia, particularly in regions characterized by strong non-Russian ethnic identities. This growing momentum underscores the fragile nature of the nation-state's legitimacy, which is being challenged on multiple fronts. In the North Caucasus, a region historically marked by resistance to federal authority, dissent against Moscow's control continues to intensify. Ethnic and cultural distinctiveness in these areas fuels grievances, as local groups push back against what they perceive as oppressive governance and systemic marginalization. Meanwhile, the situation is further complicated by the newly incorporated territories from 2022. In these regions, the legitimacy of their integration into the Russian Federation remains highly contested, with many within the population questioning both the processes that led to their annexation and the broader implications for their political and cultural autonomy. These dynamics highlight the deepening fractures within Russia's territorial and political cohesion, presenting a significant challenge to the federal government's efforts to maintain unity across its vast and diverse expanse. Economic inequality between regions has reached critical levels, creating stark divisions within the country. The disparity is particularly evident in the contrast between resource-rich and resource-poor areas. In 2016, the per capita GDP in the oil-rich Arctic Nenets region reached 70,000 euros, 43 times higher than the impoverished North Caucasian region of Ingushetia at 1,600 euros. Studies from the World Inequality Database indicate that Russia maintains the highest socioeconomic division among major economies. This disparity is further emphasized by the fact that just 110 individuals control 35% of household wealth in Russia. The political environment in Russia has increasingly been characterized by a marked centralization of authority, raising serious concerns about the erosion of regional autonomy and the balance of power within the federation. At the heart of this shift is the consolidation of influence by the presidential administration, which has effectively extended its control over a range of critical power structures, thereby diminishing the independence of regional and local governance. The federal parliament, which ostensibly represents diverse regional interests across the nation, has become a tool for implementing directives from the central government, often sidelining dissenting voices and curbing debate. This trend is mirrored in the role of regional governors, many of whom now operate under the direct oversight of the presidential administration, reducing their ability to advocate for localized priorities or address unique regional challenges without interference. Similarly, the mayors of major cities historically more responsive to local populations are increasingly subordinated to federal authority, limiting their capacity to address urban issues in ways that diverge from Moscow's agenda. This concentration of power in the hands of the central government not only weakens the principle of federalism, but also creates a political landscape where decisions are made with little regard for the diverse needs of the country's vast and varied regions. As a result, tensions between local governments and the central administration continue to grow, posing significant risks to the long-term stability and cohesion of the Russian Federation. Recent developments show that civil rights face systematic violations, with no effective mechanisms or institutions to protect residents. The flat income tax rate of 13%, while appearing equal, places a disproportionate burden on lower-income regions. The situation is further complicated by the war's impact on internal dynamics. Economic sanctions have led to asset freezes and business disruptions, creating a new coterie of oligarchs with direct family ties to top Russian politicians. This concentration of economic power in fewer hands has increased income inequality, which has been rising steadily since sanctions began. The combination of ethnic tensions, economic disparities, and political power struggles creates a volatile internal environment. With regional consumption risk sharing at 70 to 90% being managed through the fiscal system and credit markets, any disruption to these mechanisms could have severe consequences for regional stability. Western sanctions have created unprecedented economic pressures on Russia's financial stability, exposing critical vulnerabilities that threaten regional cohesion. The impact extends far beyond immediate economic effects, potentially challenging the nation's territorial integrity. The Russian economy faces significant challenges under international sanctions, with GDP contracting by 2.1% in 2022. Sanctions have particularly affected the financial sector, with approximately $300 billion worth of Russian central bank assets now immobilized. The impact varies across regions, creating new economic disparities, including major supply chain disruptions affecting industrial production, severe restrictions on technology imports, limited access to international financial markets, and reduced ability to support regional development. Resource allocation challenges have intensified since the conflict began. Russia's economy shows increasing signs of overheating, with industrial facilities operating at 81% capacity and 73% of enterprises reporting labor shortages. The situation is particularly acute in resource-rich regions where the redistribution of resources has become more complex as Russia redirects trade flows. Exports to the EU have halved to about 20%, while exports to China increased by 20%, India by 10%, and Turkey by 10%. This trade reorientation has created new regional winners and losers, intensifying existing economic disparities. The Russian financial system is currently grappling with a series of deep-seated structural vulnerabilities, which threaten its overall stability and economic viability. Initially, the country benefited from elevated energy prices, which provided a temporary boost to its financial standing. However, according to projections from the International Monetary Fund, Russia's ADI is expected to contract by over 3% this year, signaling significant underlying issues that go beyond external factors. One of the most pressing challenges is the banking sector, which has been severely impacted by international sanctions. These sanctions have restricted financial transactions with banks that represent approximately 80% of the total assets in Russia's banking industry. The restrictions have had a profound impact on the sector's operations, limiting its ability to access international capital markets and engage in routine financial transactions. This has exposed the vulnerabilities in Russia's financial infrastructure, putting immense strain on its banking institutions and further destabilizing the economic system. The situation is compounded by several critical factors that further test the resilience of the system. One of the most significant issues is the freezing of Russia's international reserves, which severely limits the government's ability to respond to financial crises or absorb external shocks. Alongside this, trade restrictions and ongoing sanctions have contributed to rising inflation, which erodes consumer purchasing power and increases economic pressures on households. Additionally, the growing cost of attempting to bypass sanctions has placed further strain on the country's financial resources, making it increasingly difficult for Russia to maintain its economic footing. The central bank, which traditionally plays a pivotal role in managing such crises, faces severe limitations due to the sanctions regime. Its ability to respond effectively has been severely hampered, and the liquid portion of the National Wealth Fund has reached its lowest level since 2008, currently standing at just $31 billion. This reduction in available reserves highlights the diminishing fiscal flexibility of the Russian government, leaving it less equipped to deal with future financial crises or support necessary economic stabilization measures. Meanwhile, the Russian government's military expenditures have surged dramatically, with the 2024 defense budget set to increase by 25%, reaching 13.5 trillion rubles. This substantial rise in defense spending, driven by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Russia's heightened security concerns, further strains the economy, diverting resources away from essential sectors such as infrastructure, social services, and investment in innovation. Taken together, these economic vulnerabilities present a complex and interconnected challenge for Russia, one that threatens not only the financial system's stability, but also the country's broader territorial integrity. As sanctions continue to isolate Russia from global financial systems, with banks in several countries reducing their links to Russian financial institutions, the long-term sustainability of the country's current economic arrangements becomes increasingly uncertain. This economic instability poses serious risks, both domestically and in terms of Russia's ability to maintain its political cohesion and global influence moving forward. Russia's military capabilities face severe strain as the Ukraine conflict enters its third year, with unprecedented personnel losses and equipment depletion threatening its ability to maintain territorial control. Recent intelligence reports indicate Russian forces have suffered approximately 315,000 casualties, nearly 90% of their pre-war ground force strength. The sustained conflict has inflicted substantial material losses on Russian forces, including 8,800 armored vehicles destroyed, 20 vessels of the Black Sea Fleet sunk, and a significant depletion of ammunition reserves. Military experts assess that while Russia can maintain current offensive operations through 2024, significant limitations in weapons and munitions production will emerge in 2025 to 2026. The situation is further complicated by Russia's dependence on foreign components for complex weapon systems. The Western Military District, traditionally Russia's most advanced military region, shows signs of severe strain. To compensate for losses, Moscow has been forced to draw on dated equipment reserves, including 50-year-old T-64 tanks, purchase artillery shells from North Korea, and acquire attack drones from Iran. The military's degraded state has prompted unprecedented measures, with sailors from Russia's only aircraft carrier being redeployed as infantry. Defense analysts note that Russia's vaunted army performed poorly in the initial phase of its Ukraine operation, with significant morale and disciplinary problems emerging. Internal military cohesion faces mounting challenges, with reports indicating widespread dissension. According to British intelligence, Russian troops have refused orders, sabotaged their equipment, and even accidentally shot down their aircraft. The situation is particularly acute among newly mobilized units, where reports suggest ill-trained formations have suffered devastating losses. Military recruitment faces growing difficulties, with the average age of volunteers rising from 40 to 50 years. Despite increased monetary incentives, the armed forces struggle to attract qualified personnel, leading to concerning measures such as recruiting prisoners and allowing defendants to avoid prosecution by signing military contracts. The military overextension has created a paradoxical situation where Russia maintains ambitious expansion plans for its armed forces while struggling to preserve existing capabilities. This disparity between goals and resources threatens to further strain the military's ability to maintain effective control over Russia's vast territory. Separatist movements across Russia's vast territories have gained renewed vigor, since the onset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, presenting significant challenges to national unity. Recent developments indicate growing independence aspirations in multiple regions, each with distinct motivations and demands. The North Caucasus region has experienced a notable resurgence of independence movements in recent years, reflecting growing dissatisfaction with Moscow's control and a desire for greater autonomy or complete separation from the Russian Federation. A significant milestone in this resurgence occurred in November 2023, when the Congress of the Peoples of the North Caucasus held a pivotal meeting in the European Parliament, highlighting the increasing prominence of separatist aspirations. The Congress brought together a diverse group of representatives from various ethnic communities within the region, each with their unique grievances and objectives. Among them were the Circassians, who demanded recognition as native peoples, emphasizing their historical ties to the land and the injustices they have faced over the centuries. The Chechens, long known for their resistance to Russian rule, reiterated their desire for the restoration of their independence, echoing the aspirations of their ancestors. Meanwhile, the Dagestanis, representing a mix of ethnic groups, called for greater autonomy, seeking to establish governance structures that could better address the needs of their people. The Ingush, too, voiced their demands for self-determination, joining the broader movement for regional independence. The movement gained further international attention and legitimacy when Ukraine's parliament made a significant gesture by formally recognizing the Kremlin's occupation of Ishkuria, the historical Chechen state, and condemning the actions taken by Russia against the Chechen people. This was the first time that a European state had issued such a condemnation, marking a key moment in the internationalization of the issue. Ukraine's stance potentially set a precedent for other nations, indicating a growing recognition of the region's calls for self-determination and autonomy. The political and diplomatic implications of this development could be far-reaching, as it signals a shift in how separatist movements in the North Caucasus are viewed on the global stage, possibly encouraging further support for their cause from international actors. The increased visibility of these independence movements poses significant challenges to the Russian government, which has long sought to maintain control over the North Caucasus despite ongoing resistance from various ethnic groups. Siberian regionalism has evolved from historical movements seeking greater autonomy to contemporary demands for economic justice. The region, which provides approximately 76% of Russia's exports, faces significant resource distribution challenges. Recent developments have highlighted these concerns as local movements have increasingly voiced demands for a fairer distribution of the immense mineral wealth that Siberia provides. There have been growing calls for the region to gain more economic autonomy, with protests against Moscow's centralized control of revenues becoming more frequent. Campaign organizers argue that Western Siberia, despite providing most of Russia's oil and gas resources, receives minimal benefits as taxes flow to Moscow. The movement emphasizes economic rather than ethnic factors, distinguishing it from other separatist movements. Russia's Far East faces unique pressures, particularly regarding economic integration with China. The region has attracted 4.2 trillion rubles in private investment over the past decade, yet faces significant development hurdles. Chinese influence has grown substantially, with China emerging as the dominant trading partner for Far Eastern border provinces. The region's challenges are compounded by demographic decline, with major cities losing population, infrastructure inadequacies limiting development, and growing economic dependence on Chinese markets. Moscow's attempts to maintain control through development initiatives have shown mixed results. The creation of a new state ministry for the Far East and massive state investments of $31 billion highlight the Kremlin's concerns about maintaining sovereignty in the region. These regional movements, while distinct in their origins and demands, share common threads of economic grievance and desires for greater autonomy. The success of any separatist movement could potentially trigger a cascade effect, particularly as Russia's attention and resources remain focused on the Ukraine conflict. Global geopolitical dynamics have emerged as crucial catalysts in Russia's potential territorial transformation. The international community's response to the Russia-Ukraine war has created unprecedented pressures on Moscow's ability to maintain its current geographical boundaries. International recognition patterns for separatist regions have shifted significantly. Syria, North Korea, and Abkhazia formally recognized the independence claims of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in 2022. This recognition preceded Russia's formal annexation of these territories, establishing a precedent for international involvement in territorial disputes. The pattern of support extends beyond formal recognition. One of the most striking features of this shift is the substantial support provided by Western powers to Ukraine. Throughout the conflict, Ukraine has received over $50 billion in assistance from a coalition of Western nations, primarily in the form of military aid, economic support, and humanitarian assistance. This level of financial and logistical backing has played a crucial role in enabling Ukraine to continue its resistance and bolster its defenses against Russian advances, further complicating the situation on the ground. In addition to financial support, multiple NATO allies have supplied Ukraine with advanced military systems, including sophisticated weaponry, air defense systems, and intelligence sharing. These contributions have not only strengthened Ukraine's military capabilities, but have also intensified the broader conflict, as NATO countries seek to counter Russia's influence and territorial ambitions in the region. The provision of such advanced military systems is a clear demonstration of the international community's growing involvement in the crisis, with NATO nations offering critical support to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, the international response to Russia's actions has included sweeping sanctions targeting key sectors of the Russian economy. These sanctions have been aimed at crippling Russia's financial, energy, and defense industries, which form the backbone of its power and influence. The measures have been designed to exert significant pressure on the Russian economy, limiting its ability to finance the conflict and reducing its access to vital resources and markets. The cumulative effect of these sanctions, along with the direct support provided to Ukraine, has shifted the balance of power in the region and created a more complex geopolitical environment, one in which international actors are increasingly taking sides, further entrenching the divide between Russia and the West. These developments indicate a broader trend toward deeper international involvement in territorial disputes, where recognition of separatist movements and direct support for governments facing aggression have become key aspects of global diplomacy. The shifting dynamics are reshaping the traditional norms surrounding state sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right of nations to defend their borders, creating a more contentious and multifaceted international order. The shifting balance of power has fundamentally altered Russia's international position. China has emerged as a dominant partner with bilateral trade exceeding $240 billion in 2023. The relationship dynamics show significant changes, such as Chinese exports to Russia increased dramatically, car exports from China rose by 600%, and yuan payments now account for 35.8% of Russian exports. Turkey's role has also evolved significantly, particularly in the Black Sea region. Despite maintaining relations with Moscow, Ankara has strengthened its strategic partnership with Ukraine. This dual alignment has complicated Russia's regional influence, especially given Turkey's control over maritime access through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. International economic measures have created substantial pressure on Russia and Russia's system. The freezing of approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets represents an unprecedented level of financial isolation. This level of financial isolation has had profound impacts on Russia's economic landscape, particularly in trade and export patterns. The European Union, traditionally one of Russia's largest trading partners, has drastically reduced its share of trade with Russia, which has dropped from 33% to just 20%. This dramatic decline reflects the shifting dynamics of global trade as European countries have sought to reduce their dependence on Russian energy resources and other exports in response to the ongoing conflict and sanctions. Simultaneously, Russia has seen a shift in its export patterns, with China emerging as a more dominant trading partner. China's share of Russian exports has increased by 20%, as Moscow increasingly turns to Beijing to replace lost markets and counterbalance Western sanctions. Additionally, the impact of these economic shifts has led to the creation of an entirely new market for alternative shipping arrangements. With many Western countries cutting off access to traditional shipping routes, Russia has been forced to explore new ways of transporting goods to international markets, resulting in the establishment of a market worth approximately $11 billion annually. This move reflects the ongoing efforts by Russia to adapt to the sanctions and find new avenues for trade, although it remains clear that the long-term economic consequences of such isolation will continue to pose significant challenges to the country's financial stability. The international community's coordinated response has led to significant structural changes in Russia's economy. Western sanctions have prompted a reorientation of trade flows, with exports to India increasing by 10% and Turkey by 10%. This realignment has created new dependencies and vulnerabilities in Russia's economic structure. The effectiveness of these international catalysts is evident in Russia's adaptation strategies. Moscow has accelerated its pivot toward non-Western partners, with China now accounting for 38% of Russian imports and 31% of exports. However, this reorientation has come at a cost, as Chinese entities often charge premium prices for products exported to Russia. These international pressures have combined with internal challenges to create a complex web of stressors on Russian territorial integrity. The coordinated nature of Western sanctions, coupled with military support for Ukraine, has fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape within which Russia must operate. Demographic challenges pose a fundamental threat to Russia's territorial cohesion, with population patterns revealing deep structural vulnerabilities across the nation's vast geography. Recent data shows Russia faces a complex web of population-related issues that could accelerate potential fragmentation. Russia's population distribution presents severe imbalances, with approximately 68% of people concentrated in just 20% of the country's territory. The European portion of Russia houses the majority of the population, while vast areas in Siberia and the Far East remain sparsely inhabited. This concentration of people in certain areas and the sparse settlement of others highlights key demographic challenges. In cities like Moscow, the population density is exceptionally high, with 4,941 people residing per square kilometer, creating intense pressure on infrastructure, housing, and resources. St. Petersburg also faces a high population density of 3,837 people per square kilometer, further contributing to the strain on urban services and the economy in the European part of the country. In stark contrast, remote regions such as Chukotka have a population density of only 0.07 persons per square kilometer, illustrating the vast emptiness of these areas and the challenges of governing and developing such sparsely populated territories. This uneven population distribution leads to significant economic and administrative difficulties, particularly in resource regions like Siberia and the Far East. These areas are abundant in natural resources, yet their low population density and geographic isolation make it difficult to exploit and manage these assets efficiently. Furthermore, the vast distances between population centers complicate the delivery of services, infrastructure development, and regional governance, exacerbating the challenges Russia faces in maintaining cohesion across its expansive territory. The Russia-Ukraine war has intensified ethnic tensions across the Federation. Recent assessments indicate that 35 out of 89 federal subjects were classified as ethnically troubled, with all ethnic republics falling into this category. Several critical factors drive these tensions, including resource control disputes between ethnic groups, cultural and linguistic rights conflicts, economic disparities between regions, and political representation challenges. In Sakha-Yakutia, conflicts have emerged over control of rich natural resources between Russians and Yakuts. The situation has been further complicated by recent terrorist attacks, leading to increased discrimination against minority groups. Migration patterns reveal concerning trends for Russia's demographic stability. The country currently hosts the fourth largest migration population globally, with over 12 million people as of 2022. Recent developments show significant shifts. Since March 2022, authorities have opened 160 criminal and 4,400 administrative cases related to immigration laws. The effects of these enforcement measures have been substantial, including the issuance of 1,759 deportation orders, 346 migrants receiving military draft notices, and a sharp rise in daily complaints regarding unlawful detentions, which have increased from 150 to 170 to over 1,700. The demographic situation has deteriorated further, with Russia experiencing negative natural population growth for 3 decades, except for a brief period between 2013 and 2015. The ongoing conflict with Ukraine has intensified these demographic challenges. This has led to an unprecedented outflow of Russia's working-age population, a reduction in immigration from traditional source countries, and a growing labor shortage in critical sectors. A recent data indicates that Russian companies currently face a shortage of approximately 4.8 million workers. This labor deficit has reached critical levels, with unemployment dropping to a historic low of 2.8% in the first quarter of 2024, creating significant challenges for economic stability and territorial management. The systematic breakdown of Russia's governance structure reveals deepening cracks in the nation's administrative foundation. Recent assessments indicate that Putin's highly personalized, authoritarian regime faces unprecedented challenges after 23 years of centralized control. The federal government's grip on power shows signs of erosion across multiple dimensions. Recent data reveals that over 100 criminal cases have been prosecuted against local officials who voiced opposition to federal policies. This vulnerability is becoming more apparent in several critical areas, reflecting the weakening of the government's authority and its ability to maintain stability. One of the most concerning trends is the diminishing control over regional security forces, which traditionally played a key role in enforcing federal policies. As these forces become more independent and increasingly aligned with local interests, the central government's ability to maintain order and control in the regions is being undermined. Additionally, the government's ability to manage economic resources is deteriorating as local authorities are increasingly asserting control over regional budgets and economic decisions, often in defiance of federal directives. Local resistance to federal authority is growing, with more regional leaders challenging the central government's mandates and policies. This rising defiance has contributed to greater difficulties in maintaining social order, particularly in regions facing economic hardship or political instability. The increasing resistance from local authorities has revealed the limits of federal power as the central government struggles to maintain influence over its vast and diverse territory. The central government's authority has been particularly compromised by its war efforts, with 176 media outlets and 51 human rights organizations being registered as foreign agents, severely limiting information flow and civil society engagement. Regional governance faces mounting challenges as Moscow's control mechanisms falter. The system of regional leadership shows significant strain, with governors lacking genuine authority and serving primarily as temporary managers accountable to the Kremlin rather than local constituents. One of the key indicators of this deterioration in regional power is the growing dependence of local governments on federal subsidies. With limited fiscal autonomy, many regions are unable to make independent economic decisions or invest in local development, relying heavily on the federal government to fund basic needs. This dependence has left regional leaders with little control over their budgets, reducing their capacity to address pressing local issues. In addition to financial constraints, regional authorities have also seen their decision-making capacity weakened, especially when it comes to crisis response. The centralization of power in Moscow has made it difficult for local leaders to act swiftly in emergencies, as they are often required to wait for directives from the federal government. This lack of flexibility hampers their ability to effectively manage local crises. The growing challenges extend to the delivery of essential social services. With increasingly limited resources and authority, regional governments struggle to maintain basic services such as healthcare, education, and welfare. In many areas, the infrastructure required to support these services is crumbling, further exacerbating social inequality and frustration among local populations. Security coordination is another area where regional governments are feeling the effects of diminished power. As Moscow tightens its control, local law enforcement and security forces have less room to operate independently, leading to gaps in the ability to maintain public order and respond to local threats. Recent data indicates that approximately 23% of Russians live without indoor plumbing, highlighting the severe infrastructure challenges facing regional authorities. The situation is particularly acute in water management, with over 11 million Russians lacking access to clean drinking water. The Russian administrative system exhibits increasing signs of dysfunction. The bureaucratic structure, designed to provide basic public services across the country, shows significant deficiencies in operation. In 2022, Russia experienced more than 10 man-made disasters, including numerous disruptions in power and water supply across the country. The system's vulnerability is further exposed by its response to international sanctions. Russian authorities have been forced to adapt to unprecedented restrictions, with approximately $300 billion worth of central bank assets now immobilized. The administrative breakdown is evident in several key areas. The judicial system faces particular challenges, with courts consistently ruling in favor of the executive branch under political pressure. This has led to a situation where, such as judges lack independence in decision-making, regional courts face systematic interference. Administrative processes show increasing inefficiency, and basic service delivery continues to deteriorate. The governance crisis extends to public infrastructure management. In Moscow, more than 56% of water sources fail to meet official safety standards, indicating a severe breakdown in basic administrative capabilities. The situation in regions is even more critical, with some areas experiencing complete failure of essential services. Recent developments show that civil rights face systematic violations, with no effective mechanisms or institutions to protect residents. The administrative system's failure is particularly evident in its inability to maintain basic services, with approximately a third of Russia's 144 million people having access to water with high lead content. The breakdown in governance is further complicated by the war's impact on administrative capacity. The regime has responded by increasing centralization, with the presidential administration exercising direct control over the government, federal parliament, and all regional governors. This concentration of power rather than solving administrative challenges, has created new vulnerabilities in the system's ability to respond to local needs and maintain effective governance across Russia's vast territory. Russia faces an unprecedented combination of destabilizing forces that mirror historical patterns of state dissolution. Military losses exceeding 315,000 casualties, frozen international assets worth $300 billion, and growing regional autonomy movements create perfect conditions for territorial fragmentation. These pressures compound existing challenges, including demographic decline, ethnic tensions across 35 federal subjects, and severe economic disparities between regions. Russia's ability to maintain its current geographical boundaries depends on successfully addressing multiple critical vulnerabilities while managing an increasingly costly war. The convergence of military overextension, economic sanctions, demographic challenges, and governance breakdown suggests that significant changes to Russia's territorial composition appear increasingly likely rather than merely possible. How long do you think Russia can hold out as the difficulties mount? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.